Hi everyone! Welcome to Blind Injustice with Danya Lee Drinks. I'm Danya Lee, and this is my drink. Hello, lover. If you haven't seen my first video, then you're probably wondering what this is behind me. Well, yes, I am this many years old, and I have a tailor wall. Sorry, not sorry. All hail the Queen! If you're new here, which you probably are because I am, welcome. This is the second part of my first video. My name is Danya. I'm a nurse and I'm also a legal nurse consultant, which allows me to have a foot in both the medical and the legal world, which I really love. This channel is dedicated to the Innocence Project and the work that they do. So we'll be covering cases of exoneration. On this channel, we'll be talking about true crime cases, followed by the injustice of the wrong person being incarcerated. We'll cover cases of exoneration while the person was still in prison, as well as posthumous exoneration, where the person was only cleared after they were unjustly executed. We'll also talk about some current cases that the Innocence Project is working on and how you can get involved. If you didn't see part one, I encourage you to go back and watch it. It'll give you a little bit more of an idea of what this channel is about, why I'm doing it, and it will also give you some pretty scary statistics about our criminal injustice system that will have you up at night. Otherwise, grab whatever you're drinking and let's get started. Today we're going to be talking about Maurice Hastings, a man who served 39 years in prison for a crime he did not commit. He was 29 years old, a young man, when the crime was committed, and he was 69 years old when he was finally exonerated. Now, I have to say, I have so much admiration for this man. Not only is he out and not bitter about what he went through, but he was his only advocate the entire time he was in prison. Well, almost the entire time, till about the last year. And he never stopped fighting for himself. He knew he was innocent, and even though nobody was willing to help him, he never quit. You will admire him as much as I do by the time we're done. And this story, like all of our stories, will have you seething. You know, I dig into these cases and I really feel like we are never going to see Lady Justice ever again.
'Cause she's dead.
Haha, see? I told you I'd find a way to work her in just about every video. Back to business. On Sunday, June 29th, 1983, just after midnight, our victim, Roberta Weidermeyer, decided that she needed some nasal spray. I know it's late, after midnight, kind of a weird time to go to the convenience store, right? But she decided she needed some nasal spray and she offered to get her husband Billy some cigarettes as well. What she failed to tell Billy is that she just recently got back in touch with an old male classmate of hers and she planned on seeing him as well. Well, Roberta never made it to this clandestine rendezvous, and she never made it home either. Her husband Billy crashed out on the couch while he was waiting for her to come home. He woke up and it was about 6:30 in the morning and he figured he must have just missed her, so he went to go to the master bedroom just to lay back down and go back to sleep. So he walks in the master bedroom and he realizes that bed has never been slept in. Roberta never came home. And of course he's extremely concerned. Shortly after he was making all these realizations, he got a really strange phone call. This man called him and told him that he had found a wallet in his front yard that morning and it looks like it belongs to Roberta. Billy goes and retrieves the wallet from the man and notices that $500 is missing. $500? Who walks around with $500 in their wallet, even today? And back in 1983, that was a lot more money. Trust me, I was there, got the lines on my face to prove it. It was a lot more money back then. But the $500 is missing. And he also notices that she is missing some calling cards. Now for you Gen Yers and up, this is a calling card. They came in all kinds of shapes and sizes, and you preloaded them with money and then you could use them to make phone calls. You might wonder why this might be necessary. Well, back in the olden days, we did not have unlimited data. We actually had to pay to make a phone call. When we called from home, if it was around our local area, we weren't charged extra for that. It was just a flat fee billed to us every month. But if we had to make long distance phone calls, which were considered outside our local area, it was a fee per hour for those phone calls. So yeah, we actually had to pay for those, and it sucked. Calling cards operated much like prepaid credit cards. You had a calling card, it had a number on it, and you loaded it with money. Then, if you needed to make a call, say you're at a friend's house, and you need to make a long distance call from there, well, you don't want them having to pay for that at the end of the month, right? So you just use your calling card to make that call, and the money would come out of the money that was on the actual calling card. Another really convenient use of a credit card was with a payphone, and we'll get into payphones in just a little bit because I don't want to hit you with too many antiques all at once. At the end of each month, just again like a credit card, you would receive a statement, and it would let you know how much you had left on the card, as well as a list of the numbers that you had called using the card that month. But Roberta's cash and her cards are missing, and now Billy's distraught. He knows something's wrong. He goes to the Los Angeles Police Department, or LAPD, to report her missing. And they let him know that he has to wait 48 hours before he can report his wife missing. Even with the missing cash, the missing wallet, the missing calling cards, they won't take a missing persons report. I'm telling you guys, the 80s were rough. Billy's trying to figure out how he can go looking for Roberta because she's missing, but she has their car. But the Weidermeyers had a woman and her son living with them as tenants, and their last name was Pinson. So when you hear me say Pinson, that's who I'm referring to, the son. He asked Pinson if he could borrow his car to go look for Roberta, and Pinson offered to drive. So they got in his Chevy Malibu, and they took off looking for Roberta. When they get to 108th and Crenshaw, Billy notices Roberta's personalized license plate on a white Cadillac driving by, but it looked like there was a black man in the driver's seat driving the car. So they take off after the car, they catch up to it and pull up to the side and get the guy to roll down the window. And there's a man, he's African American, but he's wearing a white LAPD ball cap, so they assume he's a police officer. And they ask him, where's the woman who drives this car? And that man just sits back, looks away with a little smirk on his face. Oh, she's at 106th and Normandy, man. And then he speeds off really fast. So obviously he's not a police officer, and they figure this out pretty quick, and they go tearing after him, and this car chase ensues. So they're running after him, trying to figure out who he is and what's going on, when he turns into this known blind alley and stops very suddenly, as if on purpose. Well, that's because it is on purpose. The driver turns around, faces the Chevy Malibu, and opens fire. One bullet hits the back seat. Another bullet hits the dash. A third bullet explodes the windshield into Billy's face, and a bullet lands just below his temple. So Pinson knows this guy's serious, and I need to get my friend, my landlord, to the hospital, right? So he turns around and he speeds as fast as he can to the nearest hospital where Billy is treated. He had multiple fragments of glass removed from his eyes and all but one bullet fragment removed from the back of his skull. Why all but one? That one bullet fragment had implanted in his brainstem, and removing it could cause more harm than good, so they just left it there. Meanwhile, while all this is going on, the LAPD is getting deluged with calls from people in this apartment building saying that there is a car on fire in their parking lot. So the police rush out to this apartment, and sure enough, there's this car that's completely ablaze. They get close to it, and it's a white Cadillac with personalized plates. They put the fire out and pop the trunk, and inside is Roberta's body. She's deceased. She's been shot in the head. They're able to recover the .38 caliber shell underneath her body. They do a forensic rape kit, and they detect the presence of semen. Billy's in the hospital for a while, but after he's released, he goes home and he starts getting these weird phone calls. And one of the reasons he thinks they're strange at first is because the caller keeps asking for Billy or addressing him as Billy. And Billy didn't go by his given name. His friends and family all referred to him as Touche. That was his street name. Nobody really called him Billy. So he thought that was odd, and so he knew that these calls weren't coming from anyone that he knew. And then the caller started saying, Why were you chasing me, man? You're gonna regret it. Kind of started making threats. So then Billy knew that these calls were coming from the guy that just shot them. Billy reports these calls to the LAPD and they place a tap on his phone. After that, he keeps getting calls, but there's nobody there. The caller's silent. It's almost like the caller knows that the phone is being tapped, but is too stupid to realize you don't actually have to talk for the call to be traced. And they're able to trace the call. The calls are coming from a payphone near Montclair Liquors in Long Beach, California. Kids, this is a payphone. Now, I have to tell you, when I went to load this, we're living in such a different time now. I couldn't believe, how many people have touched that handle before this guy reached for it? How many people touched those phone buttons before we walked in that phone booth? No hand sanitizer back then, and clearly it was pre-COVID, but this is a payphone.
I'm a little black woman in a big silver box.
Payphones resided all throughout towns and cities, and you would use them to make a local call. The call would cost around 25 cents back in my day, if it was a local call. If it was not a local call, and you needed to make a long distance call, it would probably be good to have right, calling card. Good job. I knew you guys could keep up. You're so smart. They know where the calls are coming from, but they don't know who's making them. They have to wait until Billy gets his calling card bill, or Roberta's calling card bill. So the bill comes in, and they notice that there are multiple calls made the week after Roberta's death. When the next bill came, there were 8 additional calls on there as well. The police began calling these numbers, trying to figure out where the calls are coming from, and they're soon able to trace them to Maurice Hastings. Now, I know this looks bad, right? We've got a woman who's dead with missing calling cards, and we've got this guy who's using those numbers. But we don't even know if he's in possession of the actual cards yet, which we'll find out later he wasn't, just the numbers. And that doesn't necessarily make him a killer. It just makes him in possession of calling card numbers that he did not pay for. That's all we really know at this point. But the police are certain this is their killer, because that is a reasonable conclusion to jump to, right? Maurice will go on to serve 39 years in prison, based almost solely on having these calling card numbers. Hastings' sister lived near the liquor store, and that's why he was using that payphone to make phone calls. He made calls all throughout the United States, Oklahoma, Pittsburgh, Nevada, Arizona, California, and he also made calls to some Greyhound bus stations. The police would use this information to say that he was trying to flee the crime. Now, they found out that he had an old girlfriend in Pittsburgh. Can a guy just be going on a trip hoping to get lucky? I mean, you make some phone calls around the United States, some to people that you actually know, and then if you're going to go see them, you have to have a way to get there, right? So you call the bus stations to get some prices. To me, this does not equal murder. Maybe that's just me. I don't know. Trust me, things get worse. Here's something worth noting, to me at least, apparently not to the police. But not a single call on those calling card numbers were to the Weidermeyers. Remember those suspicious calls that Billy Touche was getting? None of them came from those calling cards. So Maurice didn't make those calls. So if they think the same person who made those calls is the person that murdered Roberta, clearly that's not Maurice, because none of the calls to the Weidermeyers were made from those calling card numbers. Do the police care about this? Nope. The police begin looking for Maurice, and it takes them over a year to track him down. And I find this hilarious. This tells me how bungled this case was from the start. It takes them over a year to find him. Do you know where he was? At his mother's house in LA, where the crime was committed. So, if I'm fleeing a crime, I killed somebody, I stole some money, I'm going to flee. I am not going to run to my mommy's house in the same city in which I committed that crime. Red flag, anybody? Another thing I'm confused about. Why did it take them over a year to look in the most obvious place? When you're investigating, which clearly they weren't investigating, they were just hunting for Maurice, but when you're investigating a crime, usually you go to the people nearest to the suspect, right? Their family and friends. So I would have think they would have started with his mother. But it takes them over a year to get to his mom's house. What's up with that? Like the center of a Tootsie Pop? The world may never know. Now they have found Maurice. Do they question him? No. Do they fingerprint him? No. Do they question his mother? No. Do they get a search warrant for that house? No. Do they ask her if they can come in and look around? No. What do? They arrest Maurice. They arrest him. They don't question him, nothing. They've got some missing calling card numbers and a guy who made some calls from a payphone, and they arrest him for capital murder, kidnapping, and the attempted murder of Pinson and Billy. I kid you not. They have no evidence, no physical evidence, no forensic evidence. They don't have carpet fibers. They don't question anybody. They arrest him for murder. The initial trial ends in a hung jury, 10-2 in favor of guilt. But the jury was deadlocked, so the judge had to declare a mistrial and the case was thrown out. So the DA prepares a second case. This takes another 2 years, during which time, of course, Maurice spends that in prison. Both times, the prosecutors decide to seek the death penalty. The death penalty on this little tiny bit of sucky circumstantial evidence. They're going for the death penalty. In April of 1988, his second trial begins. This time, Billy and Pinson identify him as the driver. Now, I don't even know what to say about this. It's 4 years later. They couldn't identify him at the time of the crime. They couldn't identify him 2 years later when his trial began. But now, yeah, this time, oh, that's him. That's him. I recognize him. Yep, that's the guy. And then it gets better. There's this woman named Linda Toller who lived in the apartments, and she identifies Maurice as the one running away from the apartment at 11:30 at night. Okay, lady, let me see if I get this straight. You are able to identify a black man at 11:30 at night who you've never seen before and is running. Man, I want your night vision. I mean, for real, this is a circus. All of the witnesses also identify the perpetrator as having a gold tooth, and Maurice has a gold tooth. So did about 80% of African American men back in the 1980s.
A gold tooth and start calling everybody dog.
Why? You know me. I did the digging. I can tell you. So let's go back a little bit in history. The gold tooth trend started in the late 1960s in South Africa. By the middle to late 1970s, they were all the rage among the African American population in urban areas such as New York City. By the 1980s, the gold tooth would become a dentistry standard in the African American population. It was a status symbol, a slap to the man, if you will. So identifying a suspect then based on a gold tooth would be pretty much like identifying a suspect because he was wearing jeans and a ball cap today. It's not evidence, people. The coroner also finds that the .38 caliber shell under Roberta also matches the shells found in Pinson's car. This means the same suspect committed both crimes, which you and I already knew, but I'm just giving you how it's happening in real time. The DA states that the rape kit evidence is too small to type. Now back then, there was no DNA yet, or it was just coming to the forefront and wasn't widely known in the population yet. But they could type it like they type blood, so when there was no blood evidence at the scene, if they had semen, they could type it the same way and get the blood type. But the state was saying the kit was too small, the evidence is too small, they didn't even bother trying. But at least they preserved it. Thank God they preserved the evidence. They just didn't want to bother testing it. The only fingerprints found on the wallet were Roberta's. So we've got no physical evidence, no forensic evidence, and the circumstantial evidence sucks. And like I said, prosecutors also argue that Maurice skipped town based on the number of phone calls he made and where he made them to. And this woman, who did not appear at the first trial, suddenly appears at the second trial, and she said she was at a bus station with Maurice, and Maurice had told her that this woman had been murdered, that he was in possession of her calling card numbers, and the police were looking for him, and she better not say anything. Right. I commit a crime. I commit a murder. I'm going to go to the Greyhound station and I'm going to tell a total stranger the kind of trouble I'm in and then threaten her life. Because that's what all of us would do, right? Then there's this other thing that happens, which I think is so asinine, I can't even believe it was allowed in court. The prosecutors say that Maurice was trying to pawn this $225 bracelet that looks a lot like one that Roberta had. Can they produce the bracelet? No. Can they produce the pawn shop owner who can testify and identify Maurice? No. There's no evidence that this ever even happened, and quite frankly, I'm pretty sure the prosecution just pulled it straight out of their ass. And I also don't understand where the objections are on the defense side. I mean, was everybody napping, or... Certainly that's objectionable. Hastings had an alibi. He was at a party, and the defense is able to produce these pictures of the party with Hastings in them. So he's in these date and time stamped pictures where he couldn't have been at the crime scene and at the party because he's only one person and we can't be in two places at the same time. There's evidence supporting his innocence, but nobody seems to care. Hastings' sister takes the stand and she testifies that she was given these calling cards and she just gave the numbers to Billy. The calling cards were given to her by a man named Donald Sanford. I couldn't find any information on who this Sanford guy was and what his relationship to Hastings' sister was either. But do they call him to testify as a witness? I mean, I would think this guy would be a really big person of interest. He's the one in possession of the calling cards of this dead woman. I would think they would want to talk to him. Nope, they don't try to find him. They don't bring him to testify. And her testimony is pretty much dismissed because, she's the sister of the suspect. So based on all this overwhelming evidence of guilt, right? The jury finds Hastings guilty. Thank goodness they do not give him the death penalty. They set the death penalty aside and they sentence him to spend the rest of his life in prison without the possibility of parole. This is your justice system, folks. For those of you living in the U.S., this is our justice system. And trust me, it's no less broken now than it was then. So now Hastings is in prison, and he's trying to find a pro bono lawyer to help him with his appeal, and nobody will help him. So he has to file his appeal himself, which of course is denied. He also starts writing a lot of letters to attorneys, letters to the DA's office, files a lot of motions, but he doesn't get any response from anyone. That doesn't stop him from keeping going. I mean, this guy is such an advocate for himself. It's really admirable. After some time goes by, DNA becomes a thing. So he starts his letter writing campaign again, trying to get the DNA evidence from the crime scene tested. But again, nobody is interested. In the year 2000, Hastings writes a letter to the DA's office asking why his repeated requests for testing the DNA kit have been denied. At this point, he's been in prison for 15 years. The DA's office states that the forensic evidence has magically been lost. They can't find it, they're not looking for it, it just doesn't exist anymore. So now the only thing that could possibly set him free is gone. Or is it? Hastings continues to try to find representation for himself, and finally, the California Innocence Project hears his cries and reviews his case and decide that he actually has one. So they take him on, and the first thing they do is request the forensic rape kit from the DA's office. Oh, suddenly, it's not missing anymore. Here, it's right here. They run the DNA, and it is not a match. The person who killed Roberta, or at least the person who had sex with Roberta, is not Maurice. Finally, a win. Once George Gaskin is elected as DA in Los Angeles, he reconvenes the Conviction Integrity Unit, which used to be in place a while ago, but the person that preceded him got rid of it. And what this unit does is they decide whether or not there's enough evidence to run it against the now federal database that we all know as CODIS, of course. The Conviction Integrity Unit takes a look at the fact that this DNA does not match Maurice, and so they decide that it would be a good idea to run it against the CODIS database to see if it matches anyone else. Ding, ding, ding! They get a hit. So good news, right? Not entirely. The DA matches a person who has passed away in prison. Kenneth Packett was serving a 56-year prison sentence for kidnapping and sexual assault when he died in prison. This breaks my heart on so many levels because this woman was kidnapped and raped after Roberta's death. So that means that the police had actually been focusing on solving a crime and not closing a case, they may have found the right person, and this poor woman would have never had to go through what she went through. It also breaks my heart because now Roberta is never going to get justice. So we have 3 victims now in this case. We have Roberta, the original victim, who was sexually assaulted and shot in the head. We have Maurice, who did 39 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit. And we have this other victim of Roberta's perpetrator who was kidnapped and sexually assaulted as well. Mad yet? And then something else happens that I don't really understand, but I've seen this happen in other cases before too, so if you have any idea why this happens, please leave it in the comment section below, because I'd really like to know. So we know that Maurice didn't do this, because not only does his DNA not match, but the DNA matches someone we know committed the crime. This all happens in June, but Hastings isn't released until October. And like I said, I've seen this in other exoneration cases before too. They know the person isn't guilty, but it takes them months to get it out. And I know there's bureaucratic red tape and things that have to happen, but slap an ankle monitoring bracelet on the guy or something and let him go start to live his life. He should not have to spend one more minute of one more day in that cell. So again, if you know why this happens, I'd appreciate you leaving it below. Thank you. Finally, on October 22nd, 2022, yes, last fall, his sentence is vacated. He has spent almost 39 years of his life behind bars. After his release, he stated he wasn't bitter, he wasn't angry at anyone, and he just wanted to move on with his life. Mr. Hastings, sir, you are a much better person than I am. In April of this year, the California Victim Compensation awarded him $1.9 million. Now, this may seem like a lot of money, but I did the math, because I'm always going to do the math. And it turns out that he is only compensated $144 for every day he spent in prison. $144. You couldn't pay me $500 to spend 39 years in prison. We should have done more. He deserved more. Not that there's any amount of compensation that could make up this huge miscarriage of justice, but California, do better. One of the things that made me happy was that California also awarded him factual innocence, which is really rare. Now, when you get exonerated and you go to apply for a job, it does show that you were exonerated, but it also shows what the charges were, that you went to prison for it. It's not expunged from your record. It's still there. It just shows that no, you didn't commit the crime and that you were exonerated. And that still makes it pretty hard for people to hire you. People get preconceived notions in their head, and you know how folks are. When you are awarded factual innocence, everything's erased. If he went to apply for a job, it would just look like he never really had one, but there would be no charges, no time served, no exoneration, nothing. It would be as if it never happened. Well, except for the deep emotional scars, of course. So what is Mr. Hastings up to these days? I'm so glad you asked. He is doing an entrepreneurial boot camp right now to try to make up for all the classes he wanted to take as a young man but never got the chance to. And in his spare time, he helps the homeless. He actually dedicates quite a bit of his time to that cause. Why? Because he said he feels like he needs to give back. Mr. Hastings, we are the ones who need to give back to you. Here's another thing that I really love about the Innocence Project. They pay attention to the smallest of details. When Maurice was convicted, the courtroom erupted into applause, which in hindsight seems so cruel. So when he got his factual innocence, his Innocence Project attorney asked the judge if the courtroom could applaud, and the judge said yes. So Maurice got applause for all the right reasons this time. So that's our story for today. Leave a comment below and let me know what your thoughts are. Like I said, I'm open to general discussion, sharing some ideas. However, I will not tolerate any kind of bullying other people's comments, any derogatory remarks about anyone involved in this case, except maybe the LAPD. Otherwise, I'll delete the comments, and if you continue to be a doucher, you'll just be blocked from the channel altogether, okay? And if you enjoyed this case and you think you'll enjoy other cases like this, please hit the like and subscribe button below. Unfortunately, there will always be more stories to tell. And like I said, I am not trying to get YouTube famous or monetized or whatever. I am simply trying to bring awareness to the Innocence Project and the work that they do. And if you're looking to make a generous donation for tax write-off this year, I've got the link to the Innocence Project in the comments below. Innocent until proven guilty? I don't think so. Until next time, everybody, be kind to each other, don't be a Karen, and stay in your lane. Bye!